Okay, we're going to get the program a few minutes late. Thank you all for joining us here tonight for it's going to be a fantastic program because we've had Vivek here speaking for Asia Society many times in this last couple of years, and this is kind of a farewell address. But I know we will be seeing him again online or in person, hopefully, in the near future when he gets back to Hong Kong or doing program with other Asia Society centers. I'm sure our Asia Society Washington center, Wendy Cutler, will be very much welcoming Vivek and family back to Washington. For me, as executive director of Asia Society, I'm really delighted to see so many of you here in person. It is a hybrid program. We're going to be trying hybrid events now that we can gather, and then also we have online audience from not just here in Hong Kong, but also from all of the Asia Society Global Centers. So I want to thank all of you, and I'm going to turn it over in a few minutes to our chairman, Ronnie Chen, to get the program started. But really to encourage you, I think you see some of the programs here that it's been rotating. We are going to continue to be very busy this summer. We're going to still have some great programs coming up, whether it's online. And I know we have quite a few consul generals or consul representative. Talk to us if you have great ideas. Love to explore with you on because just because we're stuck in Hong Kong doesn't mean we can't continue learning through programs here at Asia Society. So please, if you have any ideas that you'd like to share with us, talk to me or Ching, my colleague, who is our working on the business and policy program. And so with that, I'm just going to hand it over to Ronnie to get the program started and encourage you, feel free to ask questions. I'm sure Vivek is happy to answer them. And so with that, Ronnie and Vivek.
Vivek, for speaking for us, you and I don't have to wear a mask. Everybody does. Great to have you back, Vivek. Alice mentioned how you have contributed so much to us over the last couple of years you're here. I understand that you'll be returning to Washington, D.C. to assume another big job, to be the global director of climate and related issues. But I want to let everyone know that the real contributor to the Asia Society is not you, but your wife. Great to have Vishaka here. Vishaka has done a lot of IT program with us. For example, we did a series on Indian IT young gurus with Chinese ones, mainland Chinese ones, and Hong Kong startups, and put them all together. And it's really very interesting to hear them talk. And it's all because of Vishaka. So thank you very much. We pay for none and we get two, so it's a good deal. Anyway, let me first congratulate you for assuming another big job in Washington, D.C. However, I advise that you keep safe. As you and I spoke over lunch, Hong Kong is a lot safer place than Washington, D.C., so please keep well. We do have, I'm very happy that we have a lot of very important friends here. We have the Consul General from Finland, great to have you, and then we have the Vice Consul from Russia. So I don't know why, but somehow some people in that part of the world are very interested in what you have to say and the subject that you're going to cover. But I'm also happy to see that we have some young students here. A supporter of ours. The daughter is here. The mother is not here. The mother was with us at the art gala, but we're delighted that the young people are now more interested in this subject. So with that, Vivek, let me ask you a couple of questions to begin with, and then later we'll open up to the floor. Can you explain the topic that you pick? What does it mean by scaling? I know the English word, but I want to make sure that I understand you more precisely. What do you mean by scaling? And what do you mean by green, what do you call it? Green business or?
Green finance.
Climate business?
Yeah.
Climate business? And what is the ladder? I'm sorry, I'm a dumb guy, okay? So you have to lower your level, please.
Okay, so no, thanks so much, Ronnie, for having me, and thanks, Alice, for having me. So I got a set of questions from Ronnie's office, and I was told
I'm
that
not
this
going
is
to
the
go over
question
them.
he's going to ask me. I knew he wouldn't, so I've now got to be prepared. So I'm going to start out by saying, so what is a ladder? It's very interesting. So a phone is a ladder for me. And a phone is a ladder, and it sounds a bit cheesy, but somebody once said a phone is a ladder for poor people to actually climb up in the economy, because this is what a phone can do, is really help them get to the next level. So essentially what we're really talking about here is really climate finance has been around for, I wouldn't say centuries, but for decades. But in the last few years, it's gained traction. So really, how do you really take this to the next level? How do you mainstream it? That's at least what I'd like to see happening, is how do you mainstream it? Today, it's everything is green, it looks good, it's a niche. And when I talk about scaling it up, I think the objective is how do you mainstream it? How do you stop using the word scaling for it? And that's how you know. And climate finance is what I would say, or green finance is when you have a positive impact on the environment. But I'll quickly add to say something is that my personal belief is all this is very good, provided it makes good business sense. To me, in the medium term at least, maybe in the short term it's going to cost you more, but in the medium term, it should be good, profitable business. This is not philanthropy. This is not CSR, and I think that's where a lot of damage was done, is when people, excuse me, people started using their CSR budgets or their philanthropy budget to say, okay, we've done a little bit of sustainability, a little bit of green, very happy. They announce it at the annual meetings and they go home and they sleep well. Well, that actually did a lot of damage to the space. And to me, I recall when in California, when billions of dollars were coming into the dot-com boom before it went bust, actually, I was hoping at least 1/10 of it would come into climate and sustainability, and it didn't.
It's a lot of money, 1/10 of it.
Well,
But you want 100% of it.
but I wanted 100% of it because it's going to have more impact in the longer run. It took a little longer, it came, and we've seen the positive impact it's had. So it's really about taking it to the next level, mainstreaming it, and demonstrating that it makes good business sense.
I'm happy to tell you that my company, I think, is the first to issue a green panda bond. So we are very conscious of that, very interested in that topic. But do you think that this is part of the progression of so-called capitalism, where people are not just making money, rather there are many other important social issues that it has to be part of it, and somehow we have to incorporate it into the business so that it's not just part of the business, but it permeate hopefully the mindset of the management as well as the every level of the business. Is there a chance of are we not already on way to that?
We are on the way to it, but I'm a little on the older side. I don't have much time, so I'm a person or a man in a hurry. We're definitely on the way to it, but it's just a bit too slow. At least in Asia, I think it's been, we've taken a long time to take off. So I think clearly this has to permeate. So, Ronnie, it doesn't have to permeate business. It has to permeate my daughter who's there, your
Yeah,
friend's
yeah.
daughter. It has to permeate through every level of society. Simple things like, do we switch the lights? Everyone thinks climate or sustainability is for somebody else to manage. It's for the large corporates to manage. No, I think it's for each one of us to manage. How much plastic do I use every day? Do I use a plastic straw? Do I switch my lights off? If you don't change our lifestyles, the large corporates can't make it happen. So each one of us, it has to happen, and that's what I think we have to get at. And then it will also get into the corporate sector, and it has to permeate at all levels. It's not something. So when we talk to a company, say to do climate finance or green, say a bank, we certainly talk to the C-suite folks, the chairperson, the board of directors, the senior management. But one thing I insisted is we also need to talk to people on the ground, the people who are actually doing the business, the actual account officers who are going out and getting business in the bank. So they understand what's the value of this. They understand why it makes sense. Now, coming to your first point, I think there are two aspects, I would say three aspects to it, but two very clear aspects. One is the do good aspect, where it's good for the environment and it makes good business sense and they're linked. The second is a huge risk we're running today. Would you want to put up $1 billion real estate development in an area which is prone to typhoons and high level of climate risks? So climate risk is a big thing today, and it was not recognized. Financial risk was always recognized by banks, but climate risk was never recognized. So fortunately, in the last 2 years or so, they are recognizing the impact of climate risks. And as a development banker, it's even more important for me, because the sad part is that you can pollute in one part of the world, but your impact may be felt in another part. And the people who are being most impacted because climate risk are typically the people at the bottom of the pyramid. You know, Japan is a rich country. They've got climate resilient buildings. Typhoons come and go. You see some damage, but not much. Countries like the Philippines, a lot more damage. India, Bangladesh. So people at the bottom of the pyramid are going to get hardest hit when there is a climate event. And it really costs, the losses due to climate events have quadrupled from the 1980s to the early 2000s. So you're really talking about very significant losses.
So you're really not just talking about climate business. You're really talking about climate society. So is IFC your goal, not just working with the business, but the society at large, that you want to raise awareness on this issue, right? So it's not just toward the business people.
So, because of who we are, we obviously operate and we can we can influence through business largely.
Right.
But one thing I would like to do personally, I'm very keen on how do you get the average person on the street, the average child, to start thinking about the environment and climate there. Because I think that's really where we have to come at. And what we've seen repeatedly is that it's much easier to have an impact when people buy into it. So I'll talk for a couple of minutes on plastics. For a long time, so if you go and talk to the average person, say in India or the Philippines, about plastics, they immediately get it. Because when there is a flood, they see the amount of plastics in the water. They see how plastics have permeated their life. If you go diving around Bali in Lombok today, you come up, you'll see plastic bottles around you. They see the trash in the river. So they're seeing what impact it's having. Whereas if you talk to them about air pollution, they're breathing it, they've been breathing it for many years. They don't realize it's actually killing them. So therefore, for society to understand, or the average citizen to understand what their actions are having, the impact their actions are having on their own health, and society at large, and the economic sort of displacement that it will cause eventually, I think society at large has to buy into it.
Well, what will it take for society to fundamentally change? I think we're on the right path, at least in this one sense. My children are far more conscientious of it, because when I grew up, it was not. It's not a thing to be. And so I have to learn it. And some of us who are more socially conscientious pick it up faster, but many people are not. But our children, such as the two young ladies here, your daughter included, welcome, that they are far more aware of this thing. So where do you think is the main button that you want to push that can do the most change?
So I think the change is going to have to come from two levels. So one is, like you said, the younger generation, the next gen today. So it's interesting. When I go and talk to a firm and I want to talk sustainability, 9 times out of 10, the sponsor or the owner will say, come and meet my son or daughter. I mean, I've got a great example of Indorama, a large conglomerate out of Thailand. It really gladdened my heart when Alok Loya said, my son Yash is the one who is leading our sustainability efforts. Yash is a young kid, and for me it was, they actually are serious about it. Now, part of it is also that the next gen is a lot more conscious. The millennials want to do the right thing. They have the capital to do it. That's a big factor. So I really think that's where a lot of flow of capital into this space. So if the millennials of today can actually make sure that their investments are sustainable and they're going into the right areas, I think that's how one change will happen. Second is, I think it's as society evolves, people understand the impact their actions are having. Unfortunately, that evolution is a bit slow today. And everyone says, if I do this little change, how does it matter? Because the rest of the 7 billion people in the world ain't changing. That is the tragedy of it, I think. But I think sections in society are understanding. If you look at what China has done, has really been amazing. And number of reasons, but one is I think people realize the long-term health impacts of pollution. So that means we're going to have elderly people who are going to be sick earlier, they're going to be out of the workforce sooner, and your healthcare costs are going to go up. So I think these realizations are taking time, but I think people are understanding them.
How do you muster support from the business community, of which IFC work with a lot? Obviously, if there's some disasters, and that we can tie it directly to, terrible actions of mankind in producing whatever that caused the disasters. And my insurance friend sitting in the front row will be very, very sad if that's the case. So short of that kind of stuff, how do you influence business leaders? They are individuals that are, very, passionate about it. I don't know, Larry Fink or somebody, right? Very conscientious of it. Ray Dalio, but they are, but most of them are still only money driven. So what do you?
So
What can we do?
I'll just ask a very simple question, okay? You're into real estate. This is a green building. This is a brown building. Which will have more value 5 years from now? The green building.
Right.
So this is exactly what I did with a very large real estate developer, probably a friend of yours in Indonesia. We're doing a deal with them. He said, green buildings are expensive by payback period. I said, this is a green building. This is a brown building. You decide which will have more value 5 years down the road. He didn't even want to pay for lunch after that. He said, you've convinced me I don't have to have lunch. I'm moving on. He did pay for lunch. But the point I'm trying to make is we have to make the business case. You have to demonstrate to the business community that it makes good business sense. In the short run, so green buildings, as you know, will cost you more initially. But then you will, once your payback period in green buildings, depending on the location, is I think down to 2 to 3 years. After that, it's just gravy. You're going to save on electricity, water. You're going to be a lot more efficient in the use of, how your waste is managed. And chances are when you try and sell that building, you are going to get a higher price for it as compared to a brown building. So it just makes a lot of good business sense. I'll give you the other example of renewable energy. So I used to run IFC's Global Credit and Risk Group for many years. And I had the distinction, which I'm not proud of it, but I say it openly, of turning down our first few investments in renewable energy in India, in Bulgaria, and in Brazil. One of them we lost money. The second one never happened. And the third one was a company in India, got listed on the NASDAQ. Now, the reason I was not comfortable as a risk manager doing it was tariffs were at 26 cents, whereas coal was 1/3 that. The good news is that tariffs have now come down to, in India, it's down to 2 to 3 cents. In Zambia, we did something which was less than 5 cents. So you have, in many countries, you've achieved grid parity with coal, with renewable energy. So you have to make the business case. And not everywhere are you going to be able to make the business case. There are certain sectors where you require a pot of money to de-risk it, to be able to attract insurance capital to come in, to be able to attract asset managers to come in, to be able to attract initially the folks who are purely money driven and for them environment is not an issue. And hoping that they see the light of day once they're in that. So you require sometimes a pot of money, what I call de-risking capital. But ultimately, I was talking to one of my colleagues in Africa the other day, and they said, here people don't care about the environment. I said, I don't believe that. I said, I've seen the amount of sustainable investing happening in Africa today. There's a hell of a lot of money coming in. But what I did say at the end was, I said, if you meet a client and you've made all these arguments that it makes good business sense, and even then they don't want to do it, I said, then our value system is very different from that client's value system. And if our values do not meet, I just think there's no point in engaging.
Such as the guy who reluctantly buy your lunch.
Well, he's bought me many lunches after that.
Oh, that's good.
And they've done a lot of green buildings, and sort of today they believe in it. They actually believe in it.
Very good. I'm happy to tell you that. Let me give a test, Vivek. Who did the first U.S. Green Building Council gold standard commercial building in China?
I think it's a company that starts with H, I think, right?
Smart man. My company. Who did the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh?
But Ronnie, here is something I'm going to say. You need to convince a lot of your friends in Hong Kong to do a lot more of it.
Really?
You do.
Okay.
There's a huge potential, and we're working with the HKMA and people here. So we've taken this on. Although we don't invest, we're not allowed to invest in Hong Kong because of the per capita income here.
Right.
But I think Hong Kong is a great opportunity to start not only making sure all new buildings are green, but I would also really love to work with you all. We've developed a tool now where you can retrofit a building and make it green or greener. It may not be perfectly up to that standard.
Right.
And I think this is just a huge opportunity for us to do in Hong Kong.
Well, too bad you're leaving, Vivek, because a lot of the building regulations are very antiquated, and those kind of design makes it very difficult to have green residential buildings. And if we can somehow, and now with technology having improved so much in the last 20, 30 years, that really some of those building codes could have been changed, in which case it will enable it to a lot easier, and the incremental cost will be less if we can do green buildings. I think that's one area that we have to work with government as well.
Yeah, so that's the approach we take. We do engage with government, so building codes are evolving over time and they can change them. It's also important that sometimes you need incentives to make these things happen. So, so that's part of what we do is work with governments, work with stakeholders, work with CSOs to make it happen. And it's an evolution. It's not an overnight. It's not a switch that you turn on and off. I mean, it took us, I think, 3 years to do the first green bond in the Philippines. I went to every bank in town saying, do a green bond. No, no, no. Finally, Tessie from BDO agreed.
What
And
year would that be?
this was, I think, 2016.
Okay.
And but once they pick it up, they believe in it then. So I recall we did the first green bond in the Philippines, and great difficulty, 150 million, and it was because of her conviction. And this was in December, and I think she came back in February. I was in Manila, and I called on them, and they said, you know what, we have another $500 million that we need. Can you do another bond issuance for us? So so the interesting thing is that there is a lot of green activity happening as we speak. It's just that some banks, some institutions don't recognize it. They're not even aware of what they're doing, we're finding sometimes.
Well, obviously, there's some industry that are more, shall we say, polluting than others. So I would imagine that IFC would focus more on the industry that are more critical in this regard, right? Infrastructure, maybe electricity making, and so forth. Can you tell us something about that? Where are you concentrating on some sectors, and why?
So, right after this tonight, I have a big board meeting where we're taking our 5-year climate change action plan to our board for discussion. And one of the things that we've put in there is really to work with the heavily... So energy, that transition is happening as we speak. It's been, in fact, in many countries, IFC is out of that business because commercial banks have taken over, they're doing it, it's efficient, it works. Yeah. But the sectors that we don't...
Including the big countries like China, India, and Pakistan.
I mean, China is really up there. India is a huge success story in solar. Like I said, prices have come to between 2 to 3 cents. China has achieved grid parity. Pakistan, we've done a lot of renewables. A lot more needs to be done, don't get me wrong. But what I'm saying is that's sort of business as usual for us. But really, I would like us to focus now on the heavily polluting manufacturing sectors. Steel, cement, building materials, fertilizer. All these are essential for economic growth there. Agriculture is another big polluting sector. People don't think of agriculture. I think agriculture is amongst the top 3 emitters of GHG emissions. So these are the sectors which are going to be a lot harder for us to decarbonize. But if you don't try to decarbonize these sectors, we will not be able to achieve the 1.5 degree goal that's been set there. So this is really where the challenge is. And I think a lot of work is happening. So you're coming up with new technologies, more energy efficient ways. And mankind evolves. So when you throw a challenge out to folks, they figure out a way to solve for it. And there's also another huge project, and I'm going to call out our common friend here who's working on something, to actually decommission coal. That is the big elephant in the room, because if you can do everything, it's great. But if you just look at China, India, Vietnam, Philippines, Don help me here, Indonesia, these 5 countries, a lot of coal is still coming up there today. And they have a lot of old polluting coal plants. So if you're not able to decommission them and the entire ecosystem, it's not about shutting down a coal plant. It's really about the coal mines. How do you take care of what we would like to call a just transition? You have to create alternative employment. The entire ecosystem. And it's going to take at least 20 years to happen. Hopefully, it'll happen then. So that's a huge task in front of all of us.
What about clean coal? How clean?
Okay. He's covering his face. To me, clean, it can be cleaner coal, but I just don't think there's something.
But coal is still coal.
Coal is coal. It's like, it's like saying coal is a black diamond. Yes, it is a black diamond, but it is, it is polluting at the end of the day. And there are alternatives to it. You see, if a country has no other alternatives, it's different. But today, you have an alternative. You can have an energy transition. It's not going to be an overnight transition, but it's there. So to me, it's still coal at the end of the day.
Say, take for example, China. Still something like what, 62% perhaps, roughly, of 59 now. Okay, of all the energy production are by coal still.
Oh, no, I'm sorry, I was saying 51% of the carbon in China
Is from the coal plants. Yeah, okay. Anyway, for the whole country, to my knowledge, roughly 60%, maybe a little bit more, of all the energy production are still from coal. So how does a big country like that transit out of coal? Is nuclear the answer? Of course, there's a lot of renewable, whether water and sun and this and that. What's the solution?
So I think, it's going to be, so one is there's going to be what I call an energy transition. So in many countries, gas is the transition fuel. because it's less polluting. But at the end of the day, gas is polluting. Let's not make a mistake there. Nuclear is something we don't finance because it's sensitive, but a lot of countries are looking at nuclear seriously. But nuclear comes with its challenges. How do you manage the nuclear waste, so on and so forth. But I think the solutions are going to be very different. Ultimately, what we're going to have, I think at least, is a lot of off-grid solutions.
Off-grid
You're not going to
solutions.
have these huge plants producing energy. Once battery technologies and storage technology prices start to come down and they reach a point of, sort of where it becomes a lot more viable, people are going to have solar panels on their roofs and store energy in the day and use it at night, I think. So it's going to be a combination of these. Uh, Solar, wind, hydros are a little harder. You need to have the natural resources, but solar and wind definitely. Solar is, like I said, prices have come down, and you're going to see it really sort of scale up in a lot of markets. So to me, it's these solutions and a lot of off-grid solutions. And I think, energy efficiency is going to play a big role. We don't look at that. But having
You don't look at that. You mean
no,
mankind do not look at
mankind,
it enough?
we don't focus on
Yeah,
that.
focus on that.
But, in many countries, transmission and distribution losses are
Yeah,
15,
huge.
20, 30%. So just imagine if you cut that down, how much carbon emissions you can save. Yeah.
Right.
I had a boss who used to make fun of me when I said we're doing this great work in China, and he thought we're changing light bulbs in companies. And we were changing light bulbs. It was a very successful program. But hey, that light bulb which you changed was 1/4 the energy of a traditional light bulb. So these are the kind of things that we are coming up with, that we are seeing happen over time, which will all ultimately, I hope, lead us to a low carbon future.
Well, you mentioned about batteries. That got me thinking about a question that is always high on my mind. An electrical vehicle. Everybody said it's going to, replace the conventional combustion engines. Is it really that climate sensitive? To make the batteries, make the cars, and just to generate the electricity in order to make the batteries, it's going to be a lot of. You may cut out on the gasoline side or the diesel side, but then you may be creating a lot more, wasting a lot more energy somewhere else making the batteries.
So I think that's a question. That's a very valid question. A lot of people have raised that. So what is the carbon footprint of an electric car? And I say, it's not what's the carbon footprint of an EV, but what's the source of energy there? So if you're going to use coal to power up your EV, the benefits are probably marginal. But if you can have a system where your grid is supplying renewable energy, then I think it's very clearly a much better option. The other interesting area where there's a lot of work going in is actually green hydrogen.
Yes.
So green hydrogen is an alternate fuel. It may not happen in cars easily, but I think they're talking about it in things like ships and for trucks and things like that for long range. Green hydrogen is another very viable alternative which is being developed. People are saying it's 5 to 7 years away. I don't know, but given the way technologies are evolving, I think we could see some breakthroughs in the next 2 to 3 years.
Before I let you go about transportation, because roughly 35% of energy usage in many countries are from transportation, and cars is only a part of it. The airplanes, that's hugely. The carbon footprint is great. So what do we do there? It's not easy to replace a battery airplane. I suppose we're still quite a ways off. So what do we do?
So I think what you're seeing in the airline industry is a lot. Again, clearly you cannot, I did read somewhere about a battery-operated plane, but I don't know how long that's a bit into the future.
Yeah.
But I think what airlines have realized, and here it's again about saving costs. It's about coming up with more efficient routes, more efficient engines. Your body weight, the weight of the planes coming up with more. So I think that's just the areas of focus. And again, I think, they are talking about mixing fuels up, so that will reduce the carbon footprint of these planes. So there is a lot of work going on, but clearly that is a huge emitting sector, but because we don't see it and we don't breathe it, people don't focus that much on it. But I think it's a matter of time before that focus changes.
I'm happy to tell you that a friend of mine, he's the first Chinese business guy to own a private jet in China. And then he's the first guy to own a second private jet in China. And he is the first guy to own a helicopter in mainland China. And after being convinced of the environmental consequences of that, he sold all his planes, and now he's joining the proletariat like myself and wait in line for a seat. So anyway, so they're changing. But you, let me go to this. You mentioned this. There's a place somewhere in North Pacific that is twice the size of Texas, full of that stuff and many other junks, right? That cannot be not biodegradable. So how, what are we doing about it? Are you, as IFC, for example, financing technology development companies or whatever that can eat up those bacteria, or whatever that eat up that plastic or what? And in the long haul, how do we wean society from using that stuff?
So, I mean, this is something that I actually will say I'm quite proud of, because we pioneered this work across the IFC in this part of the world. It started out because my mercury levels were very high, and I was trying to figure out why, and then someone said, you eat fish. Anyway, to cut a long story short, I started watching David Attenborough, and I found how much plastic is. So you'd be surprised at how much plastic we eat every day, how much plastic we drink every day, and how much plastic we breathe. There's microplastics in the air that you and I are breathing regularly, by the way. And all that is coming because of this, because we trash this. It doesn't get trashed properly. It goes into a river, that goes into the ocean. Fish get it. And those horror stories. So we just did a loan for a company called Indorama in Thailand, which is, I think, the largest producer of PET bottles in the world, to help them recycle a certain part of their production. So they've got plants in Indonesia, in Thailand, in Brazil, in India. So we're working with them to start to increase recycling. So that's one way out, is you increase the recycling component. Another way out is just to start using less plastic. I think that's going to be important. No plastic straws should be allowed. Think twice about plastic. No, at least reduce the use of single-use plastics. Recyclable plastic. But that requires, it's going to take a decade to change that, because you require a whole system of garbage collection, which makes sense. How do you recycle plastics? The EU is stipulated, I think, that 30% of soft drink producers, 30% of plastic bottles have to be recycled. So you require a push from the government. But again, it requires a lot of change from us at an individual level. Once somebody saw me, normally, I don't go shopping regularly to create food hall, but once I did, and I forgot to carry a bag. Vishaka does that. I forgot to carry my bag here. And I actually walked out with a few cans of Coke, I think, like this, because I just said I don't want to use. So it's about each one of us realizing every time you pick up a plastic cup, what does it mean? And, I remember as a young banker, when I was in banking in Thailand, I'd buy a donut, a cup of cold coffee, and something else, say a savory bun, and all three would be packed in a separate plastic bag, and then all those would be put into one, and then I'd get and I just one day said, how much plastic is there? Now, and plastic takes, 500 years to decompose? But a lot of interesting work is going on. I mean, I've had people come to me saying, we can produce decomposable plastic. We had a guy we're talking to in Vietnam that says he produces plastic that can decompose in 6 months under certain conditions. So price points are high right now because the cost of producing this is high. But I'm hoping, we will get there, because I think plastics is something which, like I said earlier, every person understands how it's touching their lives now. If you have a flood in a city, it clogs up your drains. You go swimming in a river and it comes at your face. So I think it's really hitting. I mean,
so what's our alternative? You talk about the straw. You can reusable it or what? The paper one I accept, but then you cut down a lot of trees to make that paper straws.
We have steel straws at home. You have straws made out of metal now.
Yeah. Okay, at home I have no problem, but there are restaurants in Hong Kong that I go to that use metal straws. I don't go there anymore, or I take out the straw because I just don't trust that they clean it properly. And so I may be sucking somebody's life. I'm sorry. I don't want to paint pictures that are too vivid, but anyway. So you have some issues here. I'm sorry.
No, there are no straightforward solutions, I agree. But, there are ways that one can see how you can, come up with alternatives to some of these.
Okay, so let me turn to another industry that I think IFC does a lot. And it's very important to the economic development of the world. And it impacts the carbon footprint a lot, and that is infrastructure. uh, the world has developed the way, orders from a steamboat to a railway and this and that, and the automotive and cars and airplanes. So what do we do? How do we live in 50 years from now? What should we be doing today in order to make our infrastructure more sustainable, less polluting, and all that stuff? Can you offer some thoughts?
Yeah, so I think it depends which part of infrastructure. So clearly, one thing, one big area today is urbanization. And the number that I read somewhere was that between now and 2050, there'll be another billion people going into urban areas. And this is primarily because economic growth is largely going to be led through services, not manufacturing. And services means people will congregate to cities. Yeah. So how do you develop new cities and new urban centers which are sustainable? So I would start out by saying to making sure all the construction is green buildings. You need to manage your waste better. You need to manage your water better. You need to have mass transit. BRT, which is the bus lines. One bus carries about 50 people, say, which is the equivalent of, on an average, 25 cars going. So let alone the pollution that you're saving on, it also makes better sense from traffic management. So that whole ecosystem of how do you have what they used to call smart cities, and I just say just sensible cities. So that's one area that I think is a lot of. Then waste to energy. How do you manage your waste? Just making sure that it's segregated so it can be incinerated and converted to energy is another thing to do. So that's clearly, I think, a big area of focus for us, working with governments and municipalities to set up or to plan these cities better. So that's one. Second is, I think, energy we've talked about. Transport we've talked about, so clearly that's one thing. And then I would say the other area is really the utilities, the non-energy. Water is a big thing which we haven't touched upon. Now, water may not have a direct carbon footprint, but I would keep arguing that the amount of water in the world is actually relatively stable. But as we use more of it, how are we going to manage it? So we just need to be more sensible in the way we use water. Drip irrigation when it comes to farming, for example, saves a lot of water. How can you recycle water? So there's a lot of sort of areas which you can, I wouldn't say tinker on, but actually spend a lot of time on, which do make a lot of sense. So water, waste management, we talked about transport, logistics, big area of development now with all this stuff, e-commerce exploding, logistics are going to get more and more important. If you can make sure that every warehouse is a green building now, for example, and we've done that in China. When it comes to, and I would include infrastructure, sort of the software, not software, internet, broadband as a part of infrastructure. Data centers are huge consumers of energy today.
Right.
So how do you make these data centers green? So, there's just a hell of a lot happening that can be done. And all this, like I said earlier, just makes good business sense.
Just personal interest. Cities, are they necessarily, if they are common sense cities, not the really, really bad pollutant cities, we know a lot of those, are cities necessarily more polluting? If everybody go back to and live on a farm, would it be a clean, will the world be a cleaner place? And since it is inevitable that mankind are moving toward cities, how about big cities versus small cities? Is it better to have a few really highly concentrated cities with 20 million, 30 million people, but good, hopefully, public transportation, versus many small cities? Has there been any research done along that line?
I don't know of any research, but by virtue of the fact that you already have some really large cities, I think what most of them are trying to do is let's go out 50 kilometers and build another township there, not a full city, but a township. And just make sure there's good connectivity between the main city and that township. And that township typically could have up to 1 million people, could have schools, entertainment. It's a self-contained unit, really. Going back to farms, I don't know, because like I said earlier, farming is also, a big carbon emitter. But it all comes down to one's lifestyle. If you want to live in a city, a suburb with a huge house, 6 bedrooms, air conditioning on all the time, heating on all the time, you are going to consume a lot more. So it's more about a lifestyle here rather than the location necessarily, I think. Yeah.
The world has seen places that are really have a far less carbon footprint, such as Japan. They're a small place, a lot of people, but they have done a good job. So it's not that mankind doesn't know how to improve. At least it's no perfect solution. Hong Kong, I understand, is also quite good. Am I correct? Hong Kong, because of the public transport system, that the per capita usage of energy in Hong Kong is actually not that big compared to other cities of similar economic standards. So, can you say something about Hong Kong before you leave Hong Kong? Any advice for us that can, besides the real estate developers, which I don't do anymore in Hong Kong. So, besides that,
So let me tell you, today was the first day I wore a tie in many months.
at lunchtime
At
when
lunchtime,
we had
yeah.
okay,
And I normally don't wear ties. And the reason is I want to make a statement that, and I picked this up in Japan. This is not my idea. What's the temperature in this room today? It's cold. You and I
Right,
could
it's
be in
cold.
shirts and
Right.
trousers. So I think, what we can do is if every office says there's no need to wear a tie to work, and let's just keep our air conditioning 2 degrees higher, you're going to save a lot of energy. I think this is little things that I think can be done. So this is one thing I would encourage people to do, saying you don't have to come in a suit to work every day. We'll keep the air conditioning 2 degrees higher, which makes better sense. It's not that it's really going to be hot. So there are little things that one can do, I think. I mean, and I think, cities like Hong Kong and Singapore, personally, I just find it's just too cold most of the time. So little things that can be done, and I'm sure there are many more small things that Hong Kong can do. The other thing really that I would love to see in Hong Kong is green mortgages, for example.
green mortgages.
Green mortgages.
If the house is green, then you get a slight
There's a different ways you can slice
interest.
it. You could get an interest subsidy.
Yeah.
You could get a better loan to value ratio, whatever, higher tenors, whatever. But that can really change the landscape of a city, I think. Yeah.
Okay, let's turn to green finance. Hong Kong being a financial center, many of you are in the finance industry. Is it really that useful, green finance? Does my green panda bond really, in something, you think it will contribute to what you're trying to achieve?
So I think this is the single most important thing that's going to make a difference eventually is green finance.
Really?
Single most important thing.
Why? Because it finances everything.
Because, well, it's so when her friend Larry Fink announced that he's going to look at his entire $9 trillion through a sustainability lens, that really gladdened my heart because that's the way it's going to happen. Because the only way people will start doing more green is the flow of capital starts to go to green.
So it forces others to be.
It forces others. So I'll give you the analogy. There are two companies listed on the stock exchange. One is producing a very similar product, similar margin, just assume they're identical. But one has green practices and the other has what I would call non-green or brown or gray practices. The green company will, I think, over time attract a pool of capital which is not available for brown companies, which is coming from Western Europe or Japan or the US, and their stock price starts to go up. If I'm an investor in the brown company, I'll say, what the hell, similar company, I'll sell my shares in the brown company and go to the greener company. So so that's one way. So as more and more capital comes into the green or climate economy, I think you're going to see that's the way it's going to, the acceleration of change that we're going to see because of green capital or green finance, I think far exceeds anything else because it will force people to change. Similarly, debt capital markets, your green bond. I don't know if you got a much better price for your green bond initially, but over time, it will start because you will be then attracting a much larger pool of capital as compared to your competitor who issued a regular bond. And people will be vying for the same assets, which means margins will start to get compressed marginally. So I think green capital or green finance is the way, is really what's going to make the difference around the world.
Okay, can I turn to another totally different subject? Is of personal interest to me. Is eating beef very polluting? I'm serious. I was told that the most
it is.
the most polluting country is China nowadays. Number 2 maybe the United States, and then number 3 is the kingdom of the cows. I was told. So how?
So I mean,
What should we do?
there is enough. I mean, this is scientific data which shows that a pound of beef versus a pound of chicken versus a pound of fish versus a pound of vegetables, the carbon footprint is much higher for red meats. For 2 reasons, they consume a lot more water, the whole process,
Right.
and the methane emissions from cows are much higher than from vegetables. Vegetables don't emit methane.
Right.
So there is absolutely, I did a lot of research to wean myself of beef and to start eating the Impossible Burger. So the carbon footprint of an Impossible Burger is much lower. The health benefits may not be there right away, but the carbon footprint is much lower of vegetarian food. And that there's enough evidence to prove that.
But isn't it true that even health-wise, because you're not eating as many red meat, so it must be somehow better for you because it's made of, I understand, vegetable.
So there's a great book called, forgive me, called Game Changers, right? Which actually talks about this and how the number of high-performing athletes have become vegan or vegetarian now.
Really?
So I'll get you a copy of that book. It's called Game Changers, I think. So is it called Game Changers? Yeah. You'll be surprised. A lot of your top athletes, your tennis players who were playing in the French Open last week, some of them have gone vegetarian.
How does
Because
it happen?
your recovery times are faster if you're vegetarian, is what they say.
Wow. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I asked a lot of questions. I'm sorry to monopolize the time so far, but anyway, we should have about 8 minutes. I wonder if anybody in the audience would like to ask questions. If not, I have tons of my own, so your choice, your chance. Yes, sir. The microphone is coming your way, right?
Thanks a lot for sharing your insights and giving us this crash course on what you've experienced over the past decades. You brought up a few interesting keywords. You said IFCs focus on manufacturing. You also said that overall all these investments need to make business sense. So I'm curious. There are factories in Bangladesh who say, textile factories, it also touches all of us. They say, okay, we want to purchase a more energy efficient boiler because then we will reduce energy usage. Energy cost is 30%, so it will hit our bottom line directly. We want to purchase better chemicals because then we will have to treat less. We use less water. It's good for the environment, good for us. We need capital, yeah? But they are talking of 200,000. They go to their bank and the bank says, okay, fill in this form. What industry? Textile manufacturing. Okay, that's the interest rate. So all the big banks have signed up for green finance and UN PRI and UN insurance, but the neighborhood bank of the SMEs with regards to scaling says you get the same interest rate whether or not what you invest on. They go to the insurance provider and say, I'm using better chemicals, less risk for my worker. Will you reduce my insurance premium? And they said, whoa. No, we have not come there because, time is money. We have these standard metrics based on which we measure industry segments, risks there, and interest there. Is there something from your side that IFC is working on with governments, with big banks to make it scalable, to give it to that neighborhood factory or that SME? Thanks.
So that's exactly what we're trying to do, is to work with local banks to increase their green business, really. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean you'll get a lower interest rate because for a bank, they're saying, I'll lend you money if your risk is the same. So unless and until, and this is going to evolve, it's going to take time. But that's one thing we do, is to try and work with local banks, regional banks, to help them understand what is green finance, identify opportunities, and grow that part of the business. On insurance, at some point in time, in some sectors it will happen because insurance company will say, this is a less risky proposition for me. But I think a lot of this is going to be driven on by the demand side eventually, because the person buying that garment is going to insist that if I was to sell this in the US or the EU, I want certain parameters to be met. I want to show that it's eco-friendly or it's achieved certain standards which we've agreed to our stakeholders back home. So I think it's going to be driven by both sides. But to answer your question, yes, we do want to work more with local banks and help them firstly, understand this business, why it makes sense, provide them with advice, and encourage them to do a lot more of this.
For the general who need finance, I recommend that you talk to the expert on on insurance. There's an insurance man right here. So Don, you want to defend yourself, or you want to comment on what was said about the?
I think what was said was a very good point. I don't disagree with it. And I also I'll throw something, since Vivek's going to go to Washington and fight the good fight. The fundamental change that isn't happening, we come back to those plastic, where you have 2 plastic bottles here at the Asia Society, we're trying to get rid of plastic. So if we've got the Consul General of Finland here. Finland has a deposit system for the last 30 years or something on every bottle. I used to pick up bottles as a glass bottles as a child, take them to the store, get refund to earn money. The basic thing, some basic systems are still not in place. Why doesn't Hong Kong have a deposit on plastic bottles? Return them, get paid instant cash. There are machines around the world today where you get refunded immediately. We could do that. That's not a major step, but nobody's doing that. The basic system, you're talking about green bonds. How long before we get to the point where all bonds are green? You have the financial regulators of the world pointing out the systemic risk of climate change right now. And yet we're still doing green bonds on the option. What about all those other bonds? What about all those bank loans? So are we going to see, I think with what you mentioned, Larry Fink has said, and with the sustainability movement and the pressure on companies everywhere to green their supply chains, isn't finance moving toward everything having some sort of green standard? And is the segmenting of the green bonds going to, is that really the solution, or do you have to move the whole system to be more conscious? Can you solve it just with calling things green? Everything needs to move, doesn't it?
I agree with you. Eventually, that's where we want to get to. But it's a journey, essentially. So, I mean, we're starting out with green bonds, blue bonds, and as the proportion grows, I'm hoping one day the proportion of what I call brown bonds or gray bonds is going to be a single percentage point and they'll disappear. But it's not. It's a transition. It's a journey that's going to take time to happen.
Country General from Finland, Joanna.
Thank you very much. As Finland has mentioned, I wanted to take the floor. It's actually more than 30 years, almost 50 years. Since the 70s, 93% of plastic bottles are recycled in Finland.
What
and
percentage?
cans as well, 93.
Wow.
Uh,
More than higher than Japan.
and actually a kind of a transparent plastic bottle can be recycled forever. A colored one only once. So basically the ones you have there are not bad. If you take them to Finland, we can recycle them forever.
Wow.
So in a sense, that can be done. But my question actually, I used to work in the sustainability and climate area before I came to Hong Kong. And at that point in time, there was a lot of times, for example, the bank was saying, and GEF and GCF were saying that there are not enough bankable projects, not enough green projects. What are the obstacles for what are the obstacles here? Like, what do governments and companies need to do in order for the projects to be bankable, to get financed, the green projects?
So, I mean, so that's a question that very often comes up, that are there enough green projects there? And I think there are. If a project is not bankable because it's green, so it may not make good business sense, and that doesn't mean it doesn't make sense. Maybe it's an idea ahead of its time, or because of what you're doing, it needs what I call blended finance, so some amount of de-risking capital to make it viable today. And once it's scaled up, then it makes good business sense. So that's one. The second is it's just really expensive to do today. So again, there you need some amount of grant money to make it viable today, and hopefully with time that will happen. Sometimes you need government regulations to come in. Sometimes you may need tax breaks to make it more viable. A variety of things are needed to make some of these more bankable projects. And it really depends on sector to sector. So for example, recycling industries in some countries are viable and some they're not. So sometimes, you know, what the EU, like I said, has done, 30% of all bottles have to be from recycled plastic. So you require a combination of government incentives or regulatory reforms. You require different thinking on the side of industry, and you require the financial sector to also start thinking differently. So it's a combination of all three.
Vivek, I warn you, the next question is going to be very tough because it comes from a student. Celine?
Not that tough, but I think there are some calculations on the value ecosystems perform or create for the whole world. Especially, I don't think okay, it's working. And the role that they play in mitigating the effects of climate change, and thus climate risk. So I've seen a little bit of a few companies preserving maybe a couple acres of land or a couple hundred acres of land in keeping it as a carbon sink. But I haven't really seen much on large-scale reforestation or like restoration of ecosystems and these places that can play a pretty important role in mitigating the risk of climate and the dollar value. So I was wondering if you've seen any companies moving in this direction, whether it be in the agriculture sector, infrastructure sector, and so on.
Yeah, so I think you've hit upon a very important point on what I call nature-based solutions or biodiversity. How do you preserve them? Because they are essential. We don't realize, but the importance of an insect like a bee for the survival of humanity is hugely important. Yeah. Just interesting enough, today I met somebody that actually Joanna had referred to me. So there are people who are trying to do this on reforestation, where the issue is, if there is no real cash flow from reforestation, how do you pay for the debt, or how do you have a return on equity? Now, the way I think that's eventually going to happen is through carbon credits. Because every time you do reforestation, you should be entitled to carbon credits. You sell those carbon credits, and hopefully that will help you pay for planting those forests. The challenge is the carbon credits market is relatively at a nascent stage today. It's not fully developed. A lot of work needs to go into it, and certification, standards, trading, all that. But as the carbon credits market develops, I'm hoping what you're talking about will also develop.
Time's up, but I will be happy to extend it a few minutes if there's other questions. If not, then this gentleman again.
Thanks again. The other point that both of you all touched about was the youth. You explained your personal experience. You also mentioned there are many young participants today. So I'm curious, for you also, Asia Society, in summer you have programs for children. Would you consider having a program for children during that session which says, how green are your genes, or the Sustainable Development Goals and me, or working together with schools here to say how to integrate this topic with their core curriculum? So not to disrupt it, but where they are learning about where we are in place and time, you add in some elements. Any thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I mean, there you go, Alice. That's your program for the summer.
Get your marching
I would
order,
love to
Alice.
work with Sal Khan to develop a curriculum for Khan Academy, for example, on greening, which kids can go and you get credits for that. So there's a lot to be done. I just want to say that kids are being taught environmental sciences, which is different from climate. They need to understand all the actions they take every time they want to buy something new or trash something. What is the effect of that? And I just want to end on a point that, we have to understand that consumerism is leading to a lot of this. The more you buy, the more you waste, the more you trash. And that's really the crux of the matter. Is, if the world was to consume, this is the number I had from a few years ago, if everybody in the world was to consume as much as an average American, which is what economically we all aspire to be,
Finito.
you need natural resources for, I think, 75 billion people.
Wow. Well, there's a book I would recommend by a Hong Kong gentleman who's originated from Malaysia, but of Indian extract, by the name of Chandran Nair. And he wrote a book on consumptionomics, exactly on the point that if everybody were to live like an American in the whole globe, then how that it is just totally unsustainable. So mankind has to find a new way of even arranging our society and our economy. I don't know what it is. Capitalism has served us well in one dimension, and that is creating wealth and bringing up our standards. But at the same time, we are now seeing all these ills. So what do we do? Is that something? Some final thought from you, Vivek? While you are thinking, let me just tell you a story that I used to I once told, and it got into the local press. I was a little embarrassed, but anyway. My son, who is now 38, that generation grew up so conscientious that when he was young, we would go to the bathroom and he would pee first, and I would pee first, and he would say, "Dad, don't flush the toilet. I'm going to use it next." So, it is, to me, it's pretty extreme. But on the other hand, hey, It saves 50% of the water consumption right then and there. One thing. So I think that that's what gives me hope is that the young people are far better in this regard than we are. So with that, I'll leave it to Vivek for any final thoughts that you may have. Answer that question of the gentleman or anything you want to say before you leave Hong Kong.
No, I think just
I hope
very
you won't,
quickly
but-
to answer your question, I think we need to find a balance between economic growth and the environment. And I don't think they have to be at cross purposes always. There are ways that you can make them sort of bring them closer together. It's very hard to go and tell somebody in a developing country, don't do 1, 2, 3 because you're going to pollute the environment. And because of that, you can't grow at a rate that you want to grow and come out of poverty. And as a development banker, that's critical. But I do think I just want to end by saying people think there is a trade-off between the two. I don't think there's necessarily a trade-off. I think the two can coexist at the end of the day. And we are seeing examples of that happening, whether it's renewable energy, whether it's the way we're managing our water better, mass transit systems. So I think the two can coexist, and economic growth and managing the environment at the end of the day have to go hand in hand there.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we're delighted to have Vivek with us here today. We hate to see you go. Come back more. I hope that your daughter will think of Hong Kong as her home for the rest of her life. Young lady, we welcome you. We consider you as one of ours because your mother helped Asia a lot. We appreciate that. With that, I will invite Alice to... we have a little bit of present for Vivek as well as a little bit of something. So I'm going to get off. You stay. I'm going to get off.
Okay, every time we use this room, I have to apologize for the aircon. We are working on it, but everything is automated, and so I know it's freezing in here. But yes, a lot we can do. But Vivek, can I ask Vishaka and Ariana to come up? The gift is actually for all three of you. I think this is a book that we wanted to give to all the family. In fact, I know Vishaka is a reader, and I'm sure you are too. But this book is a program we did a few weeks ago, and I feel it's very appropriate for your family as well as Asia Society. And Home is Where We Are, and it's written by Professor Wang Gongwu, who used to be a council member of Asia Society when we were founded. And so the book is, I know each of you will read it, and it's really talking about home is where your family ends up. And we hope Hong Kong is one of the stop, and I know we'll welcome you all back. And I know I also see you in Washington, D.C., where my family is, and we're going to miss you, all three of you, because you really have, and Vishaka has really, took us in a great, when you came in, and really at the introduction of our colleague Bunty, who was the former director of Asia Society India. So I know we are not going to say goodbye. I know there will be opportunity to see you again and collaborating. Now in this day of hybrid Zoom world, I know there will be, whether you're in Washington or in India or wherever you may be, I know we will be hearing back from all three of you. And I have big plans. I know you are going to be studying hard, and we'll be seeing you back in, future interns, maybe. Who knows? Because we have, I think, Celine there, who is an intern for us. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ronnie.
Thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you all back, and have safe travels. And thank you all for joining us this evening, and we look forward to having you back at future programs. Thank you.